Hey guys, welcome back again to my channel. This time it's gonna be a report on the Bloodstorm Return to Albion 2000 point game that we practiced. So once again we had a full day where we prepared for this tournament that is composed of 3 different rounds. First round you're gonna play with 1000 points, second round you're gonna play with 2000 points, and the third round you're gonna be playing with 3000 points. So you have to provide 3 different armies, each 1000 points. Together they have to make legal 2000 point and 3000 point armies, and individually they should also be able to form 1000 point armies on their own. So that is a bit of a more complex army composition than usual, but it gives some interesting armies. So in this matchup, I am not playing myself, but we have the Empire of Sonstal facing off versus the new Vermin Swarm Alpha book. For the Empire of Sonstal, we have a Marshal with Shield and Black Steel. We have a Wizard who is a Wizard added Magical Heirloom Destiny's Call Divination. This guy is also the general of the army because the player rolled this list to be the first list in his for all his matchups, so he's going to be stuck with a Wizard as a general for the event, for our day at least. Then he has 30 heavy infantry who are a parent unit, 20 heavy infantry as a support unit, 10 light infantry with handguns, 5 electoral cavalry, 5 riders with repeater guns, 5 riders with bracer pistols, a rocketeer and a volley gun. So on these small point games, I would say that especially the riders and the volley gun are quite interesting, because the volley gun doesn't suffer from too many counters in enemy armies that it usually encounters at a higher point games. Like it's 4 wounds in your army that are 5 wounds, I believe, that are quite interesting for your opponent to remove. And usually at 4,500 points, your opponent does have the tools to at least remove something from the opponent's army during the first turns of the game, especially if it's an armorless 5 hit point resilience 4 piece that has to be in the front line, basically. So that is why I usually in 4.5k don't really value volley guns that much. But at 2,000 points, it's definitely sometimes a game changer. Also the riders, they do have faint flight, they only do have discipline 7, but then again, it might still work. It still works more than half of the time. And if you manage to get them in an advantageous position with the repeater guns and also with the pistols, in total these 2 units combined, I believe they're shooting out close to 30 shots, normally on like 5+, so that's like 10 hits each round. 60 hits over the game, basically, at strength 4, so they can still dish out quite some damage. They're really good against elves, obviously, and the lower the value of the opponent hit points, the lower the effectiveness of these units are. It's going to be paired up against the Vermin Swarm, so that is currently probably one of the armies with the lowest hit point cost in the game. So yeah, I don't really know how to value this matchup, because I have the feeling that it's not really favorable for the Empire of Sonstal. However, you do have your 30 heavy infantry parent unit with the 20 heavy infantry support unit, and you do have an order on the Marshal. He does have Black Steel, so he does have in the end a 1 armor save because he's on foot. And your unit causes fear, so you have halberds which cause fear on low point levels. So the Vermin Swarm, they do have a Vermin Senator who's discipline 7, if I'm not mistaken. I think he's 7. But then again, any unit that you're going to be in combat with is going to go to discipline 6 then. You are going to have your minimized rolls, you are going to have your reroll because of this Eagle standard. However, you're not going to go through the halberds in 1 round probably, and also if you charge into the halberds, then you can expect a countercharge from the heavy infantry. Or at least that is ideally what should happen in the case of an ideal situation for the Empire of Sonstal. So say the 25 black fur veterans, they go into the halberds, they dish out some damage. Well, they're not steadfast against the halberds, probably. I think it might be still quite a difficult unit to tackle for the Vermin Swarm, because you don't get any fight and extra rank against this unit. Yeah, it could be still quite a challenge. Yeah, the Vermin Swarm, they do have a Blood Fur Legate. I think this is like the Vermin Guard character, or the Black Fur Veteran character nowadays. It used to be the old Warlord, or the, I don't know these Vermin Swarm names. The Vermin King, I don't know. Then we have a Vermin Senator, who is basically a guy who walks around and provides discipline. We have 2 units of Black Fur Veterans, that used to be the Vermin Guard. Then we have the Vermin Legionnaires, which is basically the Red Hat Arms. The Plague Disciples are Plague Monks. No, they are the old Plague Disciples, because they do have the Great Weapon, but they don't have light troops anymore. They're just a scoring unit now. And they have 2 attacks each, I believe, with Resilience 3 and Offensive Defensive 2. If I'm right. Then we have 8 Ignifier Grenadiers. They are the old Globadiers, I think. And they're quite interesting, I find, in the army nowadays. Also due to the recent nerf to the mouse rifle nowadays. So I think they're quite a nice zoning tool, at least, and they can also dish out some damage if your opponent is not careful. And then you have 9 Fetish Brutes. I think this is really insane on these 2000 point games, that you have 27 hit points at Resilience 5 in 1 unit. That is really something to respect. Yeah, so that is the lists. Let's go into the game then. So for deployment, I believe we just rolled up deployment, but I'm not sure anymore. I think it could have been the Dawn Assault. I have no idea what deployment it was again. But anyway, we see that the Empire of Sunstyle and the Vermin Swarm both are already deployed. Vermin Swarm is going to get the first turn. So the Fetish Brutes are on the right, and I think the Plague Disciples, that was the biggest unit. That's going to be the one in the middle on the left, basically. That's now in between the ruins. That is the white paper, and the Impossible, which is the stack of wood. Obviously, both armies in this tournament setting are also going to get a extra giant. So the giant on the top is the one in the ruins on the white paper, and on the bottom it's the guy holding the Dutch flag. That is a very quick Vermin Swarm turn. But basically, well, it makes sense because this player only has combat dedicated troops. He just wants to get in there and just dish out some damage practically. So yeah, at this point level in this style, I think it's quite a rush army. As you can see, the Empire of Sunstyle player makes really good use of the fact that the Vermin Swarm player was not that careful actually with his movement in the first turn. So allowing the player to make use of his pistoliers, of his riders quite effectively. I think the unit on the left might have been mistaken to have pistols, but they then have repeater guns instead. So the unit on the right is likely going to shoot at the Fetish Brutes with pistols. The unit on the left with the repeater gun I don't think they're going to shoot at the unit in the ruins, so they better shoot at a unit that's not in the ruins, obviously. Otherwise, for the Empire, we have the Halberdiers on the left. The parent unit, surprisingly, is in between the wood and the impossible terrain in the middle. I would really have loved this to be within 8 inches of the parent unit, because then the strength of the Empire becomes so much higher if you can countercharge with your parent unit. So ideally, you would move up your parent unit a bit more and then have your support unit within 8 inches out of reach of your opponent, so that if he charges, he's going to face a extra 7 combat res on your behalf because of a charge, a flank charge, which is a charge in your flank with a rank, 3 ranks extra and a banner extra. So that is a total of 7 combat res, which is quite impressive. And against these Vermin Swarm, you also get quite some revenue out of the 15 support attacks that you get extra. Because you will hit them on, I believe, 3+, because they have defensive 2, and you will also wound them on 3+, even with sword and board. So out of these 15 attacks, you might still do like 6 wounds or so, provided you get through the armor of your opponent. And that is going to be quite decisive. So I think it's quite hard maybe for Vermin Swarm to break through Empire lines as long as they're intact. Normally you have tools in the Vermin Swarm to deal with this, most notably Wrath of God, obviously. But then in this low scale matchup, I don't think you have the tools necessarily to get through a very well set up Empire defense. Then again, these 27 Resilience 5 wounds looming on the right side of the table, they are pretty scary. Yeah, so second turn, the Vermin Swarm player still rushes up further. He does manage to get his, I think it's just a unit of Black Fur veterans into the Riders on the left, which is a bit of a shame. I mean, the repeater guns, they are really attractive for shooting, and they give you great value if you manage to draw out the turns that you want to with them. If you have to sacrifice them early on, it's really a shame, and it didn't really have to happen in this scenario because, well, they could just have moved up as had happened earlier in the play, and I think that would have been the better play, because then you can just distract your opponent. So the Vermin Guard on the left, so the Black Fur veterans, they do get into the halberd block. I would expect this not to go that great for the Vermin Swarm, mostly because of the fear. And also the Vermin Senator, he is somewhere in the lines. I guess that he's the general, but he's definitely not within 12 inches of the Black Fur veterans on the left, and they themselves, I believe they only have discipline 5. The Empire block most likely causes fear now, so it's going to be a discipline 4 without a reroll, even if the Eagle standard is not within discipline range, or not within 18 inches of the Vermin Senator. So that is a unit that's going to be sacrificed probably. And then the positive thing for the Empire player here is that he can block out quite effectively the blocks of the Vermin Swarm to protect his war machines from the Vermin Swarm blocks. So that means that with his volley gun, he will probably be able to decimate the block in the middle. I don't know if the Vermin Legionnaires or Vermin Guard, they're either one of two, I think. But that would be nice. But probably it's around 12 inches. So if he is within half distance, half range, then this volley gun is gonna have a good time if he does manage to shoot at something juicy now. I think, however, he's gonna shoot at the Fetus Brutes, which is also fair. I think with the volley gun generally, I tend to just shoot at the thing that's closest to me, because these -1 to hit penalties on a volley gun, they really matter, because normally you hit on a 4+, if you roll any 1/6 with your volley gun for the amount of shots, then you're going to get a -1 to hit. And at long range you're going to get another -1 to hit. So basically at long range you're already starting with a 5+. If you roll a 6, it's going to be a 6+, so that halves the amount of hits that you're going to do. Whilst on short range you're going to go from a 4+ to a 5+. So it's way more reliable to shoot at something at short range with a volley gun than at long range. So I would definitely always shoot at short range if you have the chance with a volley gun. So as expected on the left side, the Vermin Guard, I believe, still, they ran away from the heavy infantry. And then in the middle, well, there's also the giant involved from the Empire. So I would expect the Empire to win this one. It's also a unit that has already been decimated on the Vermin Swarm side. And yeah, I don't know where the Vermin Senator is, but it looks like even on these small games, or maybe particularly on these small games, it's going to be quite a struggle to be really aggressive with Vermin Swarm, because you have to take break tests and panic tests from time to time still. So if your opponent is able to focus his forces in specific units, then it's going to be a hard time for the Vermin Swarm. But then again, if you are able to dictate the movement with your Vermin Swarm, or if you are able to make sure that you're going to be steadfast and within your discipline bubble at the places where it really matters, then you're going to have a good game with the Vermin Swarm, I think. So what is happening now, I believe, is that the Empire Wizard is being, well, persuaded to join the dark side of the Vermin Swarm. And yeah, it's not really looking good for him with a giant in the front facing and a big unit in the other facing. He's not going to go out on top of that one. Maybe it's the Marshal. Even the Marshal's not going to get out of that. Yeah, so yeah, it's funny. The Vermin Swarm, they did also lose already quite some bit, but in the end of the day, they still have a lot on the table as well. So now they're facing off against Empire, which is an army that can also bring quite a lot of bodies if they want to. And to be honest, this list, it also brings quite a lot of bodies, together with 2 artillery pieces. Yeah, matchup wise, I mean, you see that the Empire is doing quite okay at keeping the Vermin Swarm away for now. However, the funny thing is that once you defeat this first wave of Vermin Swarm, there's just the units that won the matchups in other places on the board that are just going to haunt you down and destroy you. So yeah, obviously the problem of still the 9 Fetish Brutes. By now there are 8 Fetish Brutes. There's still a big unit of Vermin Swarm on the right side. I believe still the Riders with the pistols, they're also on the right side, so that is quite funny because they can still inflict quite some damage, also because of the brace on impact rule, that they can fire their shots basically in combat, so that would enable them to have 12 attacks, hitting on 3s, wounding on 2s on the Vermin Swarm. So that's about 6 wounds. And yeah, if you put out a rear charge into a unit, it's going to be steadfast. But a rear charge into Vermin Swarm is usually not really good for the Vermin Swarm. They are still going to be steadfast, but yeah, if they're not with their general or not within Eagle standard range even, then it's going to be quite a toughie. Yeah, so there's a lot that happened in this game so far. I mean, the support heavy infantry is all the way on the other side of the table. And it's actually a breakthrough scenario. I remember the scenario now. Hey. So the idea is that you have scoring units that go into the deployment zone of your opponent, and then if you have that, then you score a game point at the end of the turn, at the end of the game turn, so your opponent also has the chance to do it in your quarter, in your half. And yeah, at the end of the match, just the amount of tokens that you have over your opponent, that is going to determine the outcome of the game, and that is basically the only win condition that you are playing for. The other being that your giant has to survive, the giant of the opponent has to die, but the scoring unit in the opponent's deployment zone, that is the most important part here. I think the Vermin Swarm also managed to do that with the unit that was engaged with the War Machine, because the War Machine didn't really move for the entirety of the game. But I should for that check the event rules, whether it's just any part of your unit or the center of your unit has to be within the deployment zone of your opponent, because that also is still something you have to consider with the Bloodstorm tournaments. Yeah, I believe this is the point where I walked past the table and I saw the game, and I was really impressed with how much of the Vermin Swarm was still alive. Because to me it looked like the Vermin Swarm army was rather intact still, and the Empire of Sunstyle army was kind of decimated. But looking back at this playthrough, it seems like there's a whole lot of vermin that already died, that never made it. That I didn't think were on the table to start with. But the Empire did quite well. So there's still a big unit of Fetus Brutes, obviously still on the table, and there's this big unit still on the right for normal armies. However, for the Vermin Swarm, a unit of 20 is nothing to consider even. And there's also still the big unit next to the Rocketeer, obviously. Whilst for the Empire, there's just some heavy infantry dudes. There's still one support unit. You have the Riders still in the middle, and you have the 2 electoral cavalry. So the cavalry, I thought, would go out to go to the deployment zone of the opponent a bit earlier. I don't know why they didn't, to be honest. With the scenario just heavily relying on getting scoring in your opponent's deployment zone. I think I would have fielded them too wide, because then you can still keep your footprint quite small and not too long. And then you can sneak in small gaps in the opposing lines. And especially if you keep them close to the Marshal, then you can still give them an order for an extra 4-inch move. So suddenly you can move 18 inches instead of the 14 inches that your opponent might expect. Anyway, this is going to be the game. So I think that it's a bit of a victory for the Vermin Swarm, because the Vermin Swarm giant still survived. I don't know in terms of game points how many game points each got, but it was definitely a bloody battle, and it was definitely also an enjoyable battle to watch. I hope it was kind of clear for you guys what happened here on the table, and next week I'll see you again.